Hi, I'm Eric Ford for Made Here. Emmy Award-winning director Elizabeth Meyer from Keene, New Hampshire, captures the spirit of her state in A Journey to the White Mountains in words and music. This filmed performance features acclaimed local author Howard Mansfield and composer and pianist Ben Cosgrove, looking at how 19th century painters changed the way we view the White Mountains. You can watch Journey to the White Mountains and other great Made Here films streaming on vermontpublic.org and through the PBS app. Enjoy the film, and thanks for watching.
On a summer's day, the road up Mount Washington has the hallmark upheaval of a tourist attraction. Wave after wave of cars and motorcycles move with the percolating hurry of a ferry crossing. We watch the light glinting off the cars miles away up the mountain. Little flecks of glass in the granite and the green. It's mesmerizing. If you didn't know better, you might mistake this for an evacuation up the mountain. The impulse that sends more than 30,000 cars and trucks hurtling up the mountain each year began with artists back in the 1820s. Today's tourists may not know it, but they've come in search of an Eden created by a legion of 19th century landscape painters. Paintings taught Americans how to look at the wilderness. Americans were eager for the lesson, and with guidebook in hand, telling them where to see the views in the famous paintings, they followed the artists. Their art created a market for the views, filled hotels with tourists, and laid the bounds for state and national parks across the nation. One of the first artists to paint the White Mountains, Thomas Cole, arrived in Crawford Notch 6 or 7 days after leaving Concord, 90 miles away. Today, those 90 miles, most of it by an interstate highway, can be covered in an hour and a half. But our speed undermines our arrival, as if everything we see is still blurred. The artists who introduced this northern wilderness to America were walkers. The great landscape paintings were born at a walker's pace. They spent days approaching the mountains. To the first white settlers, the White Mountains were not Eden. The mountains were avoided. They were a daunting, terrible wilderness full of rocky hills and clothed to infinite thick woods. But to Thomas Cole, the mountain wilderness was, he said, a fitting place to speak of God. In America, he said, we can still see the undefiled works of God, the Creator. Nature has spread for us a rich and delightful banquet. Do not turn away from it. We are still in Eden. America was Eden. God was present. A view of eternity awaited in the mountains. Many of the tourists who arrived starting in 1860 were carrying the era's most popular guidebook to the mountains, The White Hills, written by a hard-charging Unitarian minister, Thomas Starr King. There's a sermon on every page in The White Hills, a moral lesson in almost every paragraph. At 403 pages, this is an exhaustive and exhausting guide, and a mountain of prose to lay before the mountains. Every view comes with a preachment to throw off your triviality. Starr King is like a Moses of tourism who never ascends the mountain to receive the 10 Commandments, but instead lectures his flock on the right way to look at Mount Sinai. He tells the reader what to see and at what time. At about 4 p.m. on a summer's afternoon, view the great stone face from the little lake below. Best of all, if there are thunderclouds behind the stone face, in which case I suggest leaving the lake. And not any mountain view will do. The view must be framed correctly, must be more than land. It must have the qualities of a landscape painting. Starr King scolds tourists for their haste. He writes, "A large proportion of the summer travelers in New Hampshire bolt the scenery, as a man, driven by work, bolts his dinner at a restaurant. Sometimes, indeed, they will gobble some of the superb views between two trains with as little consciousness of any flavor or artistic relish as a turkey has in swallowing corn. There is no smack in their seeing." Seeing is Starr King's great subject. Slow down and look at the mountain for as long as possible. See it on a misty day and on a day sacred to clouds. Be there at sunset and sunrise. He has the dedication of plein air painters. Get outside, look and look again, sketch, return and look again, sketch and return, and maybe the place opens to you. In this daunting, terrible wilderness, the world shifted for a generation of artists. Their paintings are a story of first sight, insight, and learning to see again. The great 19th century landscape paintings were encounters with a little holy terror. They implied that God was near. They were about a vast land, about wonder that fled off the canvas. The huge mountains suggested mountains without end. They suggested that greatness without end awaited the young nation. The paintings were exhibited in Boston and New York. They were news. They were an advertisement of a great find, a scenic gold rush. The tourists followed by the trainload, filling the big wooden arcs of the hotels. They stayed for weeks. They came back to the same hotel year after year. The hotels expanded, burned, and were rebuilt ever larger. The arrival of each new railroad line spawned more hotels and additions, a wing here or there forming H-shaped, T-shaped, L-shaped buildings. Farmhouses multiplied many times. Window, 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 dormer, dormer. Longer and longer runs of clapboards unrolling like yards of linen. White, boxy buildings, crisp as a starched shirt. The hotels advertised the lengths of the piazzas. Imagine yourself lingering to take in the view, promenading after dinner. They are piazzas, not porches. More artists followed the tourists. A half dozen of the grander hotels had artists in residence. Other artists, like Benjamin Champney, had set up studios nearby. Champney was lured to North Conway with the promise of reduced room and board if he'd put the town's name on his sketches. It worked. There were soon 40 artists in the neighborhood painting. They painted the scenes that tourists saw from their hotels or nearby, walking or on a carriage ride. They painted the same scenes over and over, and they painted them in a size ready to go home. 10 by 16 inches, postcard size, a few 2 by 3 feet. The foreground is bucolic, settled, husbanded, sometimes with cattle. The distant mountains are big, recognizable in profile, and not menacing. They are dignified, familiar, presiding. Sometimes there's a storm coming or going, but blue skies prevail. They are nice paintings, easy paintings to live with. They are paintings with parlor manners. They would hang on the wall in the front parlor or hall politely in the background until you chose to look at them. The great views were domesticated. Awe was downsized to prettiness. The landscape went from being a testament to a souvenir. Visitors went from witnesses to tourists on the American plan, a room and 3 meals, all included. No revelation, no burning bush, just sightseeing. The artists no longer insisted, you must look at this. They painted pretty pictures, souvenirs ready to go. For the first artists, the White Mountains was a place awaiting their discovery, a place they would conjure. By the end of the 19th century, after all the paintings and guidebooks, it had all been seen. A visit to Crawford Notch or Franconia Notch was a paint-by-numbers exercise. The views and the corresponding emotions were prescribed. Look here and look here, do this and this. Time soon for dinner, a game of cards, a stroll on the piazza. The best of the landscape paintings are a call and response, a longing and its echo. Is God here, the painter asks, and the land answers yes. The paintings are a longing for arrival, a longing to feel at home in this not Europe land, a longing to find God and God's approval, to read the Bible in the mountains, rivers, and waterfalls and valleys. Do not turn away from it, says Thomas Cole, almost as a commandment. We are still in Eden. The modern viewer stands before the grand landscape paintings, and the echo is different. Is God here? And the echo returns only his question. All of us want something from the mountains: activity, repose, renewal. We ask a lot of granite and pine, water and sky. On the day that I stood with my artist friend James Aponovich, watching cars and motorcycles race up Mount Washington, we were just 2 more guidebook-bound seekers wanting something from the mountains. James was born in the old mill city of Nashua. Though he is a native, he had seldom been north of the state capital here in Concord. He described our trip to the North Country as going to see New Hampshire. His whole adult life, he has known the White Mountains as the artists had painted them. He has known Thomas Cole's mountains and John Frederick Kensett's mountains. James wanted to know if visual magic was still happening. I had organized James' trip to see New Hampshire. I had plotted a great circle route that wheeled us clockwise through the notches, Franconia, Crawford, and Pinkham. Heading for home, we stopped at Cathedral Edge. We were visiting the sites of the great paintings as you might visit, in some churches, the Stations of the Cross. Could we see what they saw? Would the mountains speak to us as they had to the earlier artists? Thomas Cole loved Echo Lake and its close companion, Profile Lake. Standing here about 180 years earlier, before snack stands and parking lots, he was moved to rapture by this wild mountain gorge. Cole said, "Shut in by stupendous mountains which rest on crags that tower more than 1,000 feet above the water, whose rugged brows and shadowy breaks are clothed by dark and tangled woods, they have such an aspect of deep seclusion, of utter and unbroken solitude, that, when standing in their brink, a lonely traveler, I was overwhelmed with an emotion of the sublime, such as I have rarely felt. The silent energy of nature stirred the soul to its inmost depths." Franconia Notch has survived extinction twice. In the 1920s, the notch was threatened with clear-cut logging, winner take all. A national outpouring of editorials and poems and money rescued the notch. Donations came from bankers and women's clubs, children at an orphanage sending their pennies. Franconia Notch was set aside as a state park. Then, in the 1950s, the notch was threatened again, this time with an interstate highway. The blasting and filling for 4 lanes and shoulders and access ramps would have overwhelmed the narrow notch and buried parts of Echo and Profile Lakes. After 20 years of court challenges, studies, and new federal laws, a declawed 2-lane parkway edition of the interstate slips through the notch, not much bigger than the old state route it replaced. This is the only place in the 46,000 miles of interstate where the mandated 4-lane highway was overturned. It was a great victory. Today, we have a scenic highway, a tamed landscape. It's still beautiful, but it has changed. The spirit that moved Cole and many other artists has walked away. Etchi go, etchi e, the Japanese say. One encounter, one opportunity, or one time, one meeting. One of the many Japanese expressions tricky to translate for the fleetingness of life, for the way moments arise and are gone. Etchi go, etchi e, for this time only. Cathedral Ledge was a favorite of the 19th century landscape painters. It was one of the most painted scenes. We drove to the top of the ledge. James surveyed the valley below, the famous Intervale. This broad valley had bewitched artists. Their paintings carry you into the valley's Sunday quiet. In hundreds of paintings, the Intervale provided a bucolic foreground and middle ground to Mount Washington. Along the Saco's curving riverbanks, cows grazed under the elms. Below us, on this day, on one farm, an old-timer on an old red tractor was making hay. In the next field, migrants working, backs bent, were picking strawberries. In the forest was a beach of a state park, which even at this distance looked trodden, overused, and underfunded. Directly below, the forest was cut into lots, A-frame houses, vacation land. The wide, sandy banks of the Saco River curved through the valley. Across the way as the hills climbed were a sand pit, a ski resort, and a platoon of condos, long gray slots in the green. James got a lemon-tasting look on his face. "Forget it," was all he said as he turned away. "It's closed to us," he said. "What those early painters saw is closed to us." "It is," I agreed. "On this day, at this moment, it's closed to us." Back in the valley, we stopped at a drive-through strawberry stand. We got out of the car. On our way to our last stop, we passed a mobile home dealership that featured a log cabin model. A log cabin on wheels. There's a lot of American history right there. The frontier on the road. Daniel Boone meets Jack Kerouac. Little house at the gas pump. On our many trips to the White Mountains, what did we see? I have a one-word answer: motion. We saw traffic. We saw people in park motorhomes, so friendly over breakfast, so ready to pack and roll. Community divisible in 10 minutes. We saw cars and motorcycles zooming up a mountain. We saw people in ropes and gear throwing themselves off a cliff. We saw a drive-through strawberry stand. We saw a log cabin mobile home. We saw mountains scarred for ski runs. We saw motion. We kept moving. Driving home, James was thinking about what it takes to make a lump of rock mean something to humans. After discussing this for many miles, we more or less agree that a good painting makes the unseen visible. And once visible, the painting buries it. The scene becomes obstructed and obscured by what people have been taught to see. Expectations are clouding the view. The real thing is covered over by an image that is diluted in reproductions, postcards, mugs, tote bags. The mountain view disappears. It becomes a sign, a representation of itself. Something we recognize in a blink, in an outline. Great art promises liberation, contact with the real, but ends up too often as yet another obstruction to seeing. To see is to forget the name of the thing one sees, said the poet Paul Valery. But naming the thing, painting the thing, is to forget seeing. Like a leviathan, the mountain view rises from the deep, is seen, is named, and then disappears. We were chasing echoes. The early visitors to the White Mountains delighted in echoes. Innkeepers would fire off a gun or a cannon in Crawford Notch to entertain their guests. Guidebooks would direct hikers to the better echo points, such as Mount Agassiz, where at the right spot, they could hear the mountain returning their call 5 times. There are 2 echo lakes only 45 miles apart. These mountains are full of echoes. In Franconia Notch, the firing of a cannon was part of the ritual of visiting that echo lake. The echoes broke the silence. The mountains spoke to them. But nothing in the mountains is moving to the timeline of our short lives. The mountains are millions of years old, having arisen as continents drifted and collided. They rose up and up, were scoured by ice for millennia, and stand here today in this brief moment between ice ages. The paintings are stories, and the stories they tell are of mountains that are there for us, to uplift, to instruct, to thrill, but all for us. This is a story we tell ourselves about granite and pine, water and sky. What we want to find in the mountains is everything that's missing in the valleys. Freedom, adventure, a new self, a new earth. The hope is that a sheer rise of rock, a new angle of light, will liberate us from ourselves.
Vermont Public, partnering with local filmmakers to bring you stories made here. For more, visit vermontpublic.org.